Hey gang, welcome back to another video. What I have for you today is my conversation with David Gans. This is my second time talking to Mr. Gans out in his lovely home in Oakland, California. The conversation ranges all over the place, but today's video is mostly concerned with the taper culture, great tapes, particularly the Odie brothers and his interview with them. David allowed me to use part of his interview with the Odie brothers that is on his SoundCloud. It was originally broadcast, I believe, on the Grateful Dead Hour, and it's great. They're endlessly fascinating guys, and their tapes are just out of sight. If you're not aware of them, you should definitely check them out. Secondly, exciting news. We picked up another great sponsor. This is sent to me from Krystalyn Jade Art. You can check her out on Instagram or her Big Cartel. She does great patches and artwork in general, and it's fantastic stuff. And I'm thrilled to have her on the channel as a sponsor. So thank you very much. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with David Gans. I hope you enjoy it. If you're not already, please consider subscribing, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.
Yeah. And I wasn't a heavy tape trader. I had a couple of good contacts. Ed Pearlstein and Bob Menke were very, very kind to me in the early days of collecting and stuff, but I wasn't really part of those networks where you were trading tapes by mail with people and stuff like that. So I'm not as familiar with the ins and outs of that culture. There are now books about all that stuff that have been written, and there's certainly huge oral histories out there on rec.music.gdead and places like that where you can, if you wanted to, you could find out more about who those people were. I mean, I've interviewed a bunch of tapers along the way, but I didn't really go deeply into that. Jesse Jarnow is currently writing a book about exactly, I don't know, I think it's like bootleg tapes as an alternate history of the recording industry or something like that, that he's looking at the parallel track of unauthorized recording in transmitting and promoting our culture.
So you know Garcia's favorite quote about, or famous quote about, oh, once I'm done with the kind of the older brother, the smug older brother. Once I'm done with the music, man, but he drove cross country and taped bluegrass festivals. Yeah. So the bug was in him too. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not to make the point that it was a hard sell to get people to bring, to legalize or sanction the taper section, but he was one of us in that way.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons why he was so sympathetic to it. He understood the impulse very well. Deciding to allow taping was a practical decision because they had tried to prevent it and had not had much success. And Dan Healy had a relationship with some of the tapers. He helped them. He encouraged them. He listened to their tapes. He wanted to learn from the tapers as well. So he had a symbiotic relationship with a lot of them. But the audience members were being displaced at times. People would come in and say, oh, I'm going to tape here, and they'd make everybody shut up. They'd do all these things to irritate non-tapers in the audience. So the solution was to create a taping zone where you could do that without displacing or bothering or impeding the enjoyment of the non-tapers in the crowd. The downside of that was that sometimes the taping session wasn't the most acoustically propitious place. So I knew guys that went ahead and taped in front of the board despite the legit, they'd buy their taper ticket, but they'd go find another place to tape, because they wanted the better spot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's true. And the taper section was behind the soundboard on the main floor of the Oakland Coliseum. I don't think that was a particularly good place to get a good tape, but 30 feet in front of the soundboard was a better place to get a good tape, that kind of thing. But allowing taping was a smart move that was kind of inevitable, because otherwise they were just going to go crazy trying to cut all those cables and prevent it from happening. But it also became clear over the years, there was I think New Year's Eve 71 or New Year's Eve 70, one of those, there's a moment where the guys on the stage are saying, "Hey, spotlight on tape, or get that guy, he's taping the show." And they've started raving about bootleg albums and stuff. Because right around then, in 70 and 71, was when bootleg albums were starting to happen. I bought a few at a record store in San Jose, you know, Grateful Dead and CSNY and other things. So at that moment, there was a something of a fear of bootleg recordings, you know, actually cutting into their ability to make a living. Even though the Grateful Dead didn't make much of their living from record sales, they still needed to have a viable recording career. But it became clear fairly early on to them that their fans weren't selling the tapes. They were trading the tapes. They were propagating Grateful Dead music. They invented viral marketing before that term existed, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, my friend Ed, who runs 31 Days of Dead Instagram account, posted, or the month of December, did Thank a Taper, and it was all audience tapes.
Nice.
And it forced me to I've been kind of a soundboard snob to my detriment, I feel like, because there is a great sociological thing with tapers. Yeah. And I went deep into the archive and found the notes to be really fascinating. Like there was some early 70s Winterland show. The notes said, recorded on a reel-to-reel from the front row of the balcony at the Winterland. So just to like think through the logistics of making that happen.
Yeah,
you know?
Rob Bertrando brought an open reel deck several times, I believe. I think he made the tape of 6/17/75, the Bob Freed, where we first heard Crazy Fingers and Help on the Way instrumental and stuff. I think that was Bertrando in the balcony. And I think there were other times. I remember seeing various decks in the balcony. I mean, there were electrical sockets along this in the seating areas.
Oh, there were?
Yeah. I mean, it was, you know, I don't know why, but there were electrical sockets available up there. So it didn't have to be a battery-operated Tandberg. You could, you know, plug it in. So yeah, there were tapes made, and there were other people, too. Again, there was a little bit of, you know, I think Healy was encouraging tapers at certain times and had a good relationship with some of those guys because they saw him as a mentor. You know?
Right. It's not exactly Stockholm Syndrome, but the band is up there and Healy's out with the masses, you know?
Well, he was, in a way, he was our representative to the band and vice versa. So he was kind of an interface for all that. And the Odie brothers in particular, when you start talking about audience tapes, I interviewed the Odie brothers for Sirius XM back in the early days of the channel. Like, yeah, because they talked about, Jim Odie wanted to capture the experience, the thrill of being in the audience at Dead shows. And Doug was an electronics technician of some kind. He knew about audio. I mean, they wound up owning a car stereo business down in Thomasville, Georgia for a long time, in an audio store, you know. But they teamed up to create the technology to do what Jim wanted, which was to capture the energy of the show, not the music off the stage, or not exclusively the music off the stage, but the play of the music in the room among the people. So they optimized their recordings for the audience experience. They got the music, but they also got this other stuff. And they're you know, among the best audience tapes ever made by anybody everywhere because those guys really knew what they were doing.
It was a perfect arrangement for us. Brilliant on Dan Healy's part to utilize a space that was normally dead space for dead space.
Well, you could put your microphones up on a pole so you were getting good direct sound right off the stage, right up the middle where it sounded the best.
Right, in the power alley, as they called it, yeah.
Huge image, just absolutely huge, with a sense of depth that you have to experience to believe. There's no way to get that kind of sound when the mic stand is low and you're getting the sound disrupted by reflecting off of all the heads in the vicinity. By jacking the stand up and then having the soundboard in front of you, you had an area that was relatively free of reflections, and that allowed for generating an image that is absolutely beautiful. It's like floating in space above all the people at the concert, bathed by the beautiful energy coming off the people and the PA. It's quite an experience.
We can share, whoever we can share, woman.
one of the things that I'm interested in doing with my little project here is trying to prevent context for things I don't have context for. And I'll give you a good example. My friend and I like to debate about the what makes 5877 so great. What is the contributing factors that make the performance is transcendent, and I like to over-explain things. Oh, well, they played St. Stephen that night. That's clearly, and then I went to Dead Bass. Well, it turned out that St. Stephen wasn't really a super rarity on the spring tour of 77, but Do was. And maybe that was it. And again, being sort of a reductive thinker. Oh, it was the Do. That must have been what the heads liked at the time. But I think it was actually the panoply of the whole thing.
Of course it is.
It's
never just one thing.
Right, it's all the things.
And that's a really interesting case to talk about, because I remember Jeff Tiedrick way, way, way back in the day saying, that's not even the best show of that week. And other people said the same thing. It was a pretty fucking monumental year when you think about 77. One of the factors is that Jerry Moore made a great tape of it. And there was a great story to go with that, of coming into the show and then walking out after the show into a snowstorm, for God's sake. That was another one of those things that made it a unique day. But Jerry's tape was in circulation for years. And I think it might, I don't know, I'm not following all that stuff that closely, but it might have been the only tape from that stretch, or certainly the most popular. Jerry was very effective in getting his stuff out, because he was one of the founders of Relics, and they had created the Grateful Dead Free Underground Tape Exchange with Les Capel and all that stuff. So I think that tape made it into wide circulation, and it might have just been, a great tape of a great show in some isolation contextually for what else was going on that tour. I don't know if Jerry taped the other shows on the tour, but 5/3/77 is just being released. I think now is one of the only soundboard tape from that whole run that wasn't available somehow. But 5/4 is great. 5/5, 5/7/77. There's great music in that whole year. So I think it had to do with the availability of the tape, as well as the amazingness of and also just, oral history, oral tradition. The tape gets handed along with, you're going to fucking love this. How many people handed that tape off to somebody else with the admonition that, it's going to blow their minds?
A heavy dose of expectation bias.
Well, but expectation bias sometimes leads to disappointment,
sure.
Right? Especially in this world, that God knows there's deadheads that are going, oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, all right, come on. And, hell, it really is that good.
Yeah.
So I don't know.